Tonight, we will take a slow and peaceful journey through the history of the Roman Empire. We will begin beside the Tiber River, where Rome was once only a small settlement among hills. From there, we will follow its transformation into a kingdom, then a republic, and finally one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known. You will hear about Rome's early legends, the rise of the Republic, the wars with Carthage, Julius Caesar, Augustus, the Pax Romana, the great emperors, the crisis of the 3rd century, Constantine, the rise of Christianity, and the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This is not a loud or dramatic history lesson. It is a calm story, told slowly, for quiet listening, relaxation, and deep sleep. So get comfortable, lower the volume, and let the long road of Roman history unfold gently in the background. There is no need to remember every name or every date. Just listen, breathe, and let the ancient world carry you into rest. The entire history of the Roman Empire. Long before Rome became an empire, long before its armies marched across Europe, Africa, and the Near East, long before emperors sat beneath marble ceilings and ruled over millions of people, there was only a small settlement near a river. The river was called the Tiber. It moved quietly through the hills of central Italy, carrying rainwater, silt, boats, voices, and the slow memory of the land. On its banks, shepherds watched their animals. Farmers worked the soil. Small communities lived between hills, forests, fields, and marshes. There were no marble palaces yet. No great roads stretching to the edges of the known world. No empire. No Colosseum. No legions in shining order. Only a river. A few hills. And a place that would one day become Rome. The story of Rome begins in a space between myth and history. The Romans themselves loved stories about their beginnings. They did not want to believe that their city had appeared by accident. They wanted Rome to have a destiny, a deep purpose, a sacred beginning. So they told stories. One of the most famous was the story of Romulus and Remus. According to legend, the twin brothers were born from a royal bloodline. Their mother was Rhea Silvia, and their father was said to be Mars, the god of war. But because of a struggle for power, the infants were taken away and left by the Tiber River. The river did not destroy them. Instead, it carried them gently, until they came to rest near the roots of a fig tree. There, in the old story, a she-wolf found them. She did not harm them. She fed them. She kept them alive. Later, a shepherd named Faustulus discovered the twins and raised them as his own. The boys grew strong. They became bold, ambitious, restless. And when they discovered who they were, they decided to found a city. But even at the beginning of Rome's story, there was conflict. Romulus and Remus argued over where the city should stand. They argued over signs from the gods. They argued over authority. In the legend, the argument ended with Remus dead and Romulus standing alone as founder. The date traditionally given for the founding of Rome is 753 BC. Whether the story happened exactly this way does not matter as much as what it meant to the Romans. In their eyes, Rome was born from survival, struggle, divine favor, and violence. It was a city saved by the wild, raised by the humble, and claimed by ambition. This mixture would follow Rome for centuries. The early Rome of history was not yet powerful. It was one city among many in Italy. Around it lived different peoples, Latins, Sabines, Etruscans, Greeks in the south, and many others. Italy was a land of small communities, competing cities, local kings, hill forts, farms, trade routes, temples, and shifting alliances. Rome grew slowly. Its location helped. It stood near a ford of the Tiber, a place where people could cross the river. It was close enough to the sea for trade, but far enough inland to be protected from sudden attacks by pirates. Its hills offered defense. Its nearby fields could feed its people. Its position allowed it to connect different regions of central Italy. Geography did not make Rome powerful by itself. But it gave Rome a place from which power could grow. In its earliest period, Rome was ruled by kings. Later Romans remembered 7 kings, beginning with Romulus and ending with Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. Some of these kings may be partly legendary. Some may reflect real memories of early rulers. The details are blurred by time, but the larger picture is clear enough. Rome began as a monarchy. Under its kings, Rome grew from a cluster of settlements into a more organized city. The Romans drained marshy land between the hills. They created public spaces. They built temples. They developed religious customs, social structures, and political traditions. They learned from their neighbors, especially the Etruscans. The Etruscans were one of the most important peoples in early Italy. They lived mainly north of Rome, in a region called Etruria. Their cities were wealthy, artistic, and sophisticated. They influenced Roman religion, architecture, symbols of power, public rituals, and even ideas about kingship. From the Etruscans, Rome learned many things. The use of arches. Certain religious practices. The purple-bordered toga worn by high officials. The ceremonial chair of authority. The fasces, a bundle of rods carried before magistrates, symbolizing power and punishment. Even long after Rome became the ruler of the Mediterranean world, traces of its early neighbors remained within it. Rome was never created from nothing. It absorbed. It borrowed. It adapted. This would become one of its greatest strengths. Rome could take ideas from others and make them Roman. But the kings did not last forever. According to Roman tradition, the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, ruled harshly and arrogantly. His family committed acts that outraged the Roman aristocracy. In 509 BC, the Romans expelled the monarchy and created a new form of government, the Republic. The word republic comes from the Latin res publica, meaning the public thing, or public matter. To the Romans, this was a powerful idea. No single king would rule them. Power would be shared among magistrates, assemblies, and a council of elders called the Senate. The Republic was not a democracy in the modern sense. It was deeply unequal. Wealthy aristocratic families held enormous influence. Women could not vote or hold office. Slavery existed. Ordinary citizens had political rights, but their power was limited. And yet, compared to monarchy, the Republic created a different political culture. A culture of offices. Elections. Laws. Debate. Competition for honor. Fear of tyranny. Ambition controlled by tradition. At the head of the Republic were two consuls, elected each year. Each consul held great authority, but neither ruled alone, and each could check the other. This was meant to prevent one man from becoming a king in all but name. The Senate advised magistrates and gradually became the most powerful political body in Rome. Its members came mostly from wealthy and noble families. They controlled finances, foreign policy, and long-term state direction. There were assemblies where citizens voted. There were magistrates with different duties. There were priests, judges, military commanders, and officials responsible for public order. The Roman Republic was complex. It grew over time. It changed whenever pressure forced it to change. One of the earliest and most important struggles in the Republic was the conflict of the orders. This was the long political struggle between the patricians, Rome's old aristocratic families, and the plebeians, the broader body of common citizens. The plebeians served in the army. They farmed. They worked. They paid debts. They carried much of Rome's burden. But at first, they had little access to political power and legal protection. Over generations, they demanded more rights. Sometimes they used a powerful tactic, withdrawal. They would leave the city or refuse military service, forcing the elite to negotiate. As a result, the plebeians gained important protections. They received their own officials, called tribunes of the plebs, who could defend them against abuse. The laws were written down in the 12 tables, making them more visible and less dependent on aristocratic interpretation. Over time, plebeians gained access to high offices, including the consulship. This struggle did not create equality. But it made the Republic broader and more flexible. Rome survived internal conflict partly because it was able, slowly and often reluctantly, to make room for more people inside its system. At the same time, Rome was fighting outside its walls. The early Republic was almost always at war with neighboring peoples. To modern ears, this sounds exhausting. But in the ancient world, war was often a normal part of political life. Cities fought over land, resources, honor, security, revenge, and fear of future threats. Rome fought the Latins, the Sabines, the Equi, the Volsci, the Etruscans, and others. At first, these were local wars, fought over nearby territory. But gradually, Rome expanded. Its method of expansion was unusual and powerful. Rome did not simply destroy every defeated community. It often made treaties. It granted different levels of citizenship. Some communities received full Roman citizenship. Others received partial rights. Some became allies and had to provide soldiers. Many local elites were allowed to keep status if they cooperated with Rome. This created a growing network of obligations and benefits. Rome's defeated enemies could become partners. Its partners could become soldiers. Its soldiers could become citizens. This system was not gentle. Rome could be brutal when resisted. But compared with many ancient powers, it was remarkably good at absorbing people into its expanding order. By the early 3rd century BC, Rome controlled most of the Italian peninsula. But beyond Italy lay a much larger world. To the south and west was the Mediterranean Sea. And across that sea stood Carthage. Carthage was a great city in North Africa, founded centuries earlier by Phoenician settlers. It was wealthy, maritime, and powerful. Its ships moved across the western Mediterranean. Its merchants traded widely. Its influence reached Sicily, Sardinia, North Africa, and parts of Spain. Rome and Carthage did not begin as natural enemies. For a time, they had treaties. They occupied different spheres. But as Rome expanded into southern Italy, and as both powers became involved in Sicily, conflict became more likely. The struggle between Rome and Carthage became one of the great turning points of ancient history. The wars between them are called the Punic Wars. The First Punic War began in 264 BC and lasted for more than 20 years. It was fought mainly over Sicily. Rome was strong on land, but Carthage was strong at sea. At the beginning, Rome had little naval tradition compared to Carthage. But the Romans learned quickly. They built fleets. They copied ship designs. They adapted. They endured heavy losses, storms, defeats, and disasters. Still, they kept returning. This persistence became one of Rome's defining traits. Rome could lose battles and continue. It could suffer terrible setbacks and raise new armies. It could adapt after failure. After years of struggle, Rome won. Carthage gave up Sicily. Rome gained its first province outside Italy. This was a major moment. Rome was no longer only an Italian power. It had become a Mediterranean power. But the conflict with Carthage was not over. The Second Punic War began in 218 BC, and it nearly destroyed Rome. The great Carthaginian commander Hannibal led an army from Spain, across the Alps, and into Italy. This was one of the most daring military movements in history. Hannibal brought soldiers, cavalry, and war elephants through harsh mountain terrain and descended into Italy like a storm. For years, Hannibal defeated Roman armies. At Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, and most famously at Cannae in 216 BC, where he surrounded and destroyed a massive Roman force in one of the worst defeats Rome ever suffered. After Cannae, many states might have surrendered. Rome did not. This is one of the most important facts in Roman history. Rome lost tens of thousands of men. Its allies wavered. Hannibal remained in Italy. Fear spread through the Republic. And still, Rome refused to negotiate. It raised more armies. It changed tactics. It avoided direct battle when necessary. It attacked Carthaginian power elsewhere. A Roman general named Scipio eventually carried the war to North Africa. Hannibal was recalled from Italy to defend Carthage. In 202 BC, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio defeated Hannibal. Rome won the Second Punic War. After this victory, Rome became the dominant power in the western Mediterranean. Carthage survived, but it was weakened. Hannibal lived, but his world had changed. Rome's confidence grew. So did its ambitions. The Third Punic War came later, from 149 to 146 BC. By then, Carthage was much weaker. Some Romans still feared it, or claimed to fear it. Others wanted its final destruction. The Roman statesman Cato the Elder famously ended many speeches with the idea that Carthage must be destroyed. Eventually, Rome attacked. After a brutal siege, Carthage fell. The city was destroyed. Its territory became a Roman province. In the same year, 146 BC, Rome also destroyed Corinth and Greece. This was another symbolic moment. In 1 year, Rome showed its power over both the western and eastern Mediterranean. By the mid-2nd century BC, Rome had become a great imperial republic. This phrase may sound strange. Imperial republic. But that is what Rome was. It still had republican institutions, consuls, senate, assemblies, magistrates. But it ruled territories far beyond Italy. It controlled provinces, commanded armies abroad, collected tribute, and influenced kingdoms. Its success brought wealth. And wealth brought problems. Conquest changed Rome. Treasure flowed into the city. Slaves were brought in large numbers. Elite families gained enormous estates. Senators and businessmen profited from provinces. Generals became rich and famous. Rome's old society of small farmers and citizen soldiers began to shift. Many small farmers struggled. Some had served long campaigns abroad and returned to neglected land. Others could not compete with large estates worked by enslaved labor. They drifted toward Rome, where the population grew and poverty became more visible. Meanwhile, the elite competed more fiercely for office, glory, and wealth. The Republic had been built for a city-state and its Italian alliances. Now it governed a Mediterranean empire. Its institutions strained under the weight. This strain became clear in the age of reform and conflict that followed. Two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, tried to address Rome's social problems in the 2nd century BC. They came from an elite family, but they saw that land inequality and poverty threatened the Republic. Tiberius Gracchus proposed land reforms to redistribute public land to poorer citizens. His methods angered many senators. In 133 BC, he was killed by political opponents. This was shocking. Roman politics had always been competitive, but the murder of a tribune marked a dangerous step. Violence entered political life more openly. A decade later, his younger brother Gaius Gracchus introduced broader reforms. He also gained enemies. In 121 BC, he too died violently. The deaths of the Gracchi did not solve Rome's problems. They revealed them. The Republic was becoming a place where political disputes could end in blood. At the same time, Rome's military system was changing. A general named Gaius Marius rose to prominence. He was a talented commander and a new man, meaning he did not come from the oldest noble families. Marius reformed the army, or at least benefited from changes already underway. Increasingly, soldiers were recruited from poorer citizens who had little property. These soldiers depended on their generals for pay, land, and rewards. This created a dangerous new loyalty. In the older ideal, soldiers were citizen farmers serving Rome. Now, many soldiers began to look to their commanders personally. The army became more professional. More effective in some ways. But also more political. Generals who could promise land and wealth might command loyalty stronger than the state itself. This was one of the deep cracks in the Republic. Marius became consul several times and defeated serious threats from northern tribes. But his rivalry with another powerful figure, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, pushed Rome into civil war. Sulla was an aristocratic commander. He and Marius became enemies over military command, honor, and political control. In an unprecedented act, Sulla marched his army on Rome. This was a terrible turning point. A Roman army, led by a Roman general, entered Rome to force political change. The boundary had been crossed. Later, after more conflict, Sulla seized power and became dictator. He carried out proscriptions, lists of enemies who could be killed and whose property could be seized. He reformed the constitution to strengthen the Senate and weaken popular power. Then, surprisingly, he resigned and retired. But the damage had been done. The Republic had learned that armies could decide politics. Future generals would remember. In the 1st century BC, Rome was still powerful abroad, but unstable at home. Ambitious men rose in a system that rewarded glory but could no longer contain it. Among them were Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. Pompey was a brilliant general, celebrated for victories in the East and against pirates. Crassus was enormously wealthy. Caesar was ambitious, intelligent, charismatic, and deeply in debt, but gifted in politics and war. In 60 BC, these three men formed an informal political alliance known as the First Triumvirate. It was not an official office. It was a private arrangement among powerful men who wanted to get what the Senate resisted giving them. Caesar became consul in 59 BC. After his consulship, he received command in Gaul. Gaul was the region roughly corresponding to modern France, Belgium, and surrounding areas. There, Caesar spent years fighting, conquering, negotiating, writing, and building his reputation. His commentaries on the Gallic War presented him as a disciplined, rational commander defending Roman interests. But the wars were also a path to personal power. Caesar's conquest of Gaul brought Rome enormous territory, wealth, slaves, and prestige. It also gave Caesar something even more important: an experienced army loyal to him. Back in Rome, the political balance changed. Crassus died in a disastrous campaign against Parthia in 53 BC. The alliance between Caesar and Pompey weakened. Pompey moved closer to the Senate. Many senators feared Caesar's power and wanted him to give up his command before returning to Rome. Caesar feared prosecution and political destruction if he returned as a private citizen. The Republic faced a crisis. In 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army. The Rubicon marked the boundary between his province and Italy. By crossing it with troops, Caesar committed rebellion. According to later tradition, he said, "The die is cast." Whether he spoke those exact words or not, the meaning was clear. There was no easy return. Civil war followed. Pompey and many senators fled Italy. Caesar moved quickly, then fought across the Roman world. In 48 BC, he defeated Pompey at Pharsalus in Greece. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered. Caesar followed and became involved in Egyptian politics, including his famous relationship with Cleopatra VII. After more campaigns, Caesar emerged as the dominant figure in Rome. He was appointed dictator, eventually dictator perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. He introduced reforms. He reorganized the calendar, creating the Julian calendar. He settled veterans. He expanded the Senate. He planned campaigns. He offered clemency to some enemies. He also gathered honors and authority in ways that frightened many Romans. To his supporters, Caesar brought order after chaos. To his enemies, he threatened to become a king. And for Romans shaped by centuries of hatred toward monarchy, this fear was powerful. On the Ides of March, March 15, 44 BC, a group of senators assassinated Julius Caesar in the Senate House. Among them was Brutus, whose name became forever tied to betrayal, though he believed he was saving the Republic. Caesar fell beneath the knives of men who thought they were killing tyranny. But they did not restore the Republic. They opened another cycle of civil war. After Caesar's death, power did not return peacefully to the Senate. Instead, it passed into the hands of men who commanded armies, money, and loyalty. Three figures rose: Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted lieutenant; Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir; and Lepidus, another powerful Roman. Together they formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BC. Unlike the First Triumvirate, this was an official legal authority with extraordinary powers. They defeated Caesar's assassins at Philippi in 42 BC. Then they divided the Roman world. But alliances among ambitious men rarely remain peaceful. Lepidus was pushed aside. Antony took power in the east and became closely connected with Cleopatra of Egypt. Octavian controlled the west. Propaganda flowed between them. Octavian presented Antony as corrupted by Eastern luxury and dominated by Cleopatra. Antony's supporters saw Octavian as a cold and calculating rival. The conflict became not only political, but symbolic: Rome against Egypt, West against East, tradition against foreign influence, though the reality was more complex. In 31 BC, Octavian's forces defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the naval battle of Actium. The next year, Antony and Cleopatra died in Egypt. Egypt became a Roman province. Octavian stood alone. After decades of civil war, one man had control of Rome. But Octavian was careful. He had learned from Caesar's fate. Rome still hated the word king. So Octavian did not call himself king. He claimed to restore the Republic. In 27 BC, he received the title Augustus, meaning revered or majestic. He took the name Princeps, first citizen. He kept many republican forms: Senate, consuls, magistrates, assemblies. But real power rested with him. He controlled the armies. He controlled key provinces. He held immense authority. The Republic, in name, continued. But in reality, Rome had entered a new age. The age of emperors. The Roman Empire had begun. And yet, it did not begin with a sudden announcement. It began quietly, beneath old words and familiar offices. Rome did not wake one morning and say, "The Republic is gone." Instead, it slowly learned to live under one man's power, because that power promised something the exhausted Republic had failed to provide: peace, order, stability. After generations of civil war, many Romans were willing to accept less political freedom in exchange for safety. This was the deep bargain of Augustus. He gave Rome peace. And Rome gave him power. The world that followed would be vast, complex, brilliant, unequal, violent, creative, and enduring. Roads would stretch across provinces. Cities would rise with forums, baths, theaters, and temples. Latin and Greek would carry law, literature, trade, and administration. Armies would guard frontiers from Britain to Syria, from the Rhine to the Sahara. Emperors would be wise, cruel, strange, brilliant, weak, and unforgettable. Some would build. Some would destroy. Some would rule for decades. Some would last only months. But all of them would stand in the long shadow of the small city by the Tiber. A city that began among hills and myths. A city that expelled its kings, built a republic, conquered its neighbors, defeated Carthage, ruled the Mediterranean, tore itself apart, and finally placed its exhausted world into the hands of Augustus. For now, imagine Rome at the moment of change. The old Senate still meeting. The temples still smoking with offerings. The forum still filled with voices. Veterans remembering civil war. Merchants counting coins. Mothers carrying water. Slaves lighting lamps. Poets writing under patronage. Soldiers watching roads. And above them all, Augustus, careful and patient, presenting himself not as a king, but as the restorer of a broken world. The Republic had ended, though many of its shapes remained. The empire had begun, though many pretended it had not. And in that quiet contradiction, Rome entered the next chapter of its history. A chapter of emperors. Of peace and power. Of marble and law. Of distant frontiers. Of golden ages and dangerous success. The story of the Roman Empire was only beginning. The story of the Roman Empire was only beginning. After years of civil war, Rome was tired. It was tired of armies marching against other Roman armies. Tired of generals promising salvation and bringing violence. Tired of assassinations, proscriptions, betrayals, broken alliances, and sudden changes of fortune. Tired of not knowing which powerful man would control the city next. So when Augustus brought stability, many people accepted the new order. They may not have called it monarchy. They may have continued to speak of the Republic. The Senate still met. Magistrates were still elected. Old titles remained. Rituals continued. Laws were passed. Public life still used familiar language. But beneath the old surface, power had changed. Augustus stood at the center. He was careful, patient, and politically brilliant. He understood that Rome did not want a king, so he did not dress himself as one. He called himself princeps, the first citizen. He presented his power as service. He said he restored the Republic, not destroyed it. He accepted honors slowly, in ways that seemed traditional. He allowed the Senate to keep dignity, while making sure real command remained in his hands. This was the genius of Augustus. He created a monarchy that pretended not to be one. And because it brought peace, it worked. His reign began an age later called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. This does not mean the empire had no violence. Rome still fought wars. Armies still guarded frontiers. Rebellions still happened. Provinces could still suffer. The peace was not universal, and it was not gentle for everyone. But compared with the civil wars that had torn the Roman world apart, the age of Augustus felt calm. Roads became safer. Trade expanded. Cities grew. Veterans were settled. Temples were restored. Public buildings rose. Rome itself was transformed. Augustus famously said that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. This was not completely literal, but it captured something true. Under Augustus, the city became more monumental, more ordered, more imperial. He rebuilt temples. He supported poets. He reorganized administration. He created a more permanent military structure. He established the Praetorian Guard, elite soldiers stationed near Rome to protect the emperor. He reformed taxation in the provinces. He promoted traditional family values and religious revival. He wanted Rome to see his rule not as domination, but as moral renewal after chaos. Art and literature flourished. The poet Virgil wrote the Aeneid, an epic that connected Rome's destiny to the hero Aeneas, who escaped the fall of Troy and journeyed toward Italy. In this poem, Rome's empire seemed not accidental, but fated. Horace wrote poetry that reflected the age's search for balance, order, and meaning. Livy wrote a vast history of Rome, looking back toward the old virtues of the Republic. Augustus understood the power of stories. Rome needed to believe that its suffering had led somewhere. That civil war had ended in order. That the empire was not only power, but destiny. He ruled for more than 40 years. By the time he died in AD 14, almost no one alive could clearly remember the Republic as it had once been. A whole generation had grown up under one ruler, with one center of authority. The new system, once fragile, had become normal. But Augustus had one problem that would trouble many emperors after him: succession. How does a system that pretends not to be a monarchy pass power from one ruler to the next? Augustus had no surviving son. He lost several possible heirs. In the end, power passed to Tiberius, his stepson. Tiberius was experienced, capable, and reserved. He had served as a successful general and administrator. But he did not have Augustus's political warmth or charm. His reign began with competence, but over time became darker, more suspicious, and more withdrawn. Tiberius eventually left Rome and spent much of his later reign on the island of Capri. In Rome, the influence of Sejanus, the commander of the Praetorian Guard, grew dangerously. Trials for treason increased. Fear entered elite political life. Senators became uncertain of what they could say, whom they could trust, and what might be reported. The empire continued to function. Provinces were governed. Armies remained. Taxes were collected. But the atmosphere at the center grew tense. Tiberius died in AD 37. After him came Caligula. At first, Caligula was welcomed with hope. He was young, connected to the beloved family of Germanicus, and people expected a fresh beginning after the coldness of Tiberius. But his reign quickly became infamous. Ancient sources describe Caligula as cruel, extravagant, unstable, and humiliating toward the Senate. Some stories about him may be exaggerated, shaped by hostile elite writers who hated him. But there is little doubt that his rule became deeply unpopular among powerful groups. He spent lavishly. He demanded honors. He insulted senators. He treated power theatrically and dangerously. After only 4 years, in AD 41, Caligula was assassinated by members of the Praetorian Guard. This was another important moment. An emperor could be killed. And the soldiers near Rome could decide what happened next. After Caligula's murder, the Senate considered restoring the Republic, but the idea was no longer realistic. Power had moved too far. The army mattered too much. The imperial system, though young, had already become the structure around which Rome operated. The Praetorian Guard found Claudius, Caligula's uncle, hiding in the palace, and declared him emperor. Claudius was an unlikely ruler. He had physical disabilities and had been underestimated by his family for years. But he was intelligent, scholarly, and administratively capable. His reign was far more successful than many expected. Under Claudius, the empire expanded into Britain in AD 43. Roman armies crossed the sea and began the long process of conquering and governing the island. Britain became a new province, though resistance would continue for generations. Claudius also strengthened imperial administration. He used freedmen, former slaves in imperial service, as important officials. This angered senators, who disliked seeing men of low birth gain influence. But the growing empire needed administration, records, correspondence, finance, and organization. The emperor's household was becoming a kind of government. Claudius also extended citizenship and opportunities to provincial elites. He understood that Rome could not govern a vast empire forever as if only old Italian families mattered. The empire needed to include its provinces more fully. Still, palace politics remained dangerous. Claudius married Agrippina the Younger, a powerful and ambitious woman. She promoted her son Nero as successor. In AD 54, Claudius died, perhaps poisoned, though the exact truth is uncertain. Nero became emperor. At first, Nero's reign began under guidance. He was young, and important figures such as Seneca and Burrus helped govern. Early years were relatively stable. But over time, Nero moved away from restraint. He loved performance, music, theater, and artistic display. He wanted admiration not only as ruler, but as performer. To Roman aristocrats, this was shocking. Public performance was associated with lower status. For an emperor to sing and act seemed shameful to many elites. Nero's reign became darker. He had his mother Agrippina killed. He eliminated rivals. He became increasingly feared. Then, in AD 64, a great fire swept through Rome. The fire destroyed large parts of the city. Nero responded with relief efforts and later built a vast palace complex, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. But rumors spread that he had benefited from the destruction, or even caused it. These rumors may not have been true, but they damaged his reputation. After the fire, Nero blamed Christians, a small and still little-known religious group in Rome. This became one of the earliest persecutions of Christians by Roman authority. Nero's rule grew more unstable. Revolts broke out. Governors and generals turned against him. In AD 68, abandoned by many and declared a public enemy, Nero took his own life. His death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the line that had begun with Augustus. It also opened a dangerous question. If no member of the founding family remained, who could be emperor? The answer came through war. AD 69 became known as the year of the four emperors. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian each claimed power in turn. Armies in different parts of the empire supported different men. Once again, Rome learned that the emperor was not chosen only in the capital. He could be made by the legions. At last, Vespasian emerged victorious. He founded the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian was practical, disciplined, and experienced. He restored order after civil war. He repaired finances. He strengthened the state. He began construction of one of Rome's most famous monuments, the Flavian Amphitheater, better known as the Colosseum. The Colosseum was built on land that had belonged to Nero's Golden House. This was symbolic. Where Nero had built private luxury, the Flavians built public spectacle. The amphitheater could hold tens of thousands of spectators. It became a place of gladiatorial games, animal hunts, executions, rituals of power, and public entertainment. To modern eyes, the violence of the games is disturbing. To Romans, the amphitheater was a stage of order, courage, punishment, hierarchy, and imperial generosity. The emperor gave games to the people. The crowd gathered. The empire displayed animals, prisoners, fighters, wealth, and control. Rome was a world of both high culture and harsh spectacle. Vespasian died in AD 79, reportedly joking even near death. His son Titus became emperor. Titus ruled only briefly, but his reign is remembered for major events. In AD 79, Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum under ash, pumice, and volcanic material. The disaster preserved a tragic and extraordinary snapshot of Roman life: houses, shops, paintings, bread ovens, graffiti, streets, bodies, and daily objects frozen in time. Titus also completed and dedicated the Colosseum with grand games. He died in AD 81. His brother Domitian followed. Domitian was capable in administration and took the empire seriously, but he became increasingly autocratic and suspicious. He demanded to be treated with great honor, clashed with the Senate, and punished perceived enemies. Like many emperors who ruled with fear, he maintained order but created hatred among elites. In AD 96, Domitian was assassinated. With his death, the Flavian dynasty ended. The Senate chose Nerva, an elderly senator, as emperor. Nerva's reign was short, but important. He adopted Trajan, a respected general, as his heir. This began a period sometimes called the era of the five good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. The phrase is later and idealized, but it captures something real. During this period, the empire reached a high point of stability, expansion, administration, and cultural life. Trajan became emperor in AD 98. He was born in Spain, making him the first emperor from a provincial background rather than Italy. This showed how much the empire had changed. Rome was no longer simply a city ruling others. It was becoming a wider imperial world, where provincial elites could rise to the highest position. Trajan was a soldier emperor. Under him, Rome reached its greatest territorial extent. He conquered Dacia, north of the Danube, roughly in modern Romania. Dacia brought wealth, especially gold, and Trajan celebrated the victory with a great column in Rome. Trajan's column still stands today, its spiral reliefs showing scenes from the Dacian Wars. Trajan also campaigned in the east against Parthia and briefly extended Roman control into Mesopotamia. For a moment, Rome's reach stretched farther than ever before. But expansion had limits. After Trajan's death in AD 117, Hadrian became emperor. Hadrian understood that the empire could not expand forever. Instead of pushing the frontiers endlessly outward, he focused on consolidation, defense, and administration. He traveled widely across the empire, more than most emperors. He visited provinces, inspected troops, ordered building projects, and paid attention to local conditions. Hadrian's name is famously connected with Hadrian's Wall in Britain. This wall stretched across northern Britain and marked a frontier of Roman power. It was not simply a wall in the modern sense of a border fence. It was a military zone, with forts, gates, roads, and controlled movement. It represented Hadrian's wider policy: define, organize, and defend the empire rather than endlessly enlarge it. Hadrian was cultured, complex, and deeply interested in Greek civilization. He supported architecture and the arts. In Rome, he rebuilt the Pantheon, one of the most extraordinary buildings of the ancient world. Its great dome and central oculus created a space that still feels calm, balanced, and almost cosmic. Hadrian's reign was not without violence. In Judea, a major revolt led by Bar Kokhba broke out and was brutally suppressed. The consequences for the Jewish population were severe. Roman power could build roads, cities, and law, but when challenged, it could also be devastating. After Hadrian came Antoninus Pius in AD 138. His reign was long, peaceful, and stable. He did not travel widely like Hadrian. He did not seek great conquest like Trajan. Instead, he governed carefully, maintained order, and respected tradition. Later generations remembered his reign as one of the calmest periods of imperial history. For a sleep history story, Antoninus Pius may seem quiet. But sometimes quiet reigns are the most revealing. Under him, we see the empire working. Not as a series of dramatic battles or palace scandals, but as a vast system of cities, roads, laws, taxes, farms, workshops, ports, temples, schools, baths, and households. Imagine the empire in the 2nd century. A merchant ship leaves Alexandria, loaded with grain from Egypt, sailing toward Rome. In Gaul, a potter shapes red gloss pottery for sale across the provinces. In North Africa, olive oil is pressed and poured into amphorae. In Hispania, miners work in silver and copper mines. In Syria, caravans move goods between Roman cities and eastern trade routes. In Britain, soldiers stand watch near the northern frontier. In Greece, students listen to philosophers and teachers of rhetoric. In Rome, crowds fill bathhouses, markets, temples, theaters, and streets. The empire was not only emperors and battles. It was daily life. It was water flowing through aqueducts into cities. It was paved roads carrying officials, soldiers, merchants, letters, and news. It was coins passing from hand to hand with the emperor's face stamped on them. It was Latin in the West and Greek in the East. It was local gods and Roman gods, old customs and new identities, village traditions and imperial law. It was not equal. Far from it. There were sharp divisions between rich and poor, free and enslaved, citizen and non-citizen, men and women, city and countryside. Slavery was built into Roman society and economy. Enslaved people worked in homes, fields, mines, workshops, and administration. Some suffered terribly. Some could be freed and become freedmen or freedwomen, but their lives remained shaped by hierarchy. Roman peace rested on Roman power. Still, the empire created a kind of shared world across huge distances. A traveler could move from Spain to Syria and find Roman roads, Roman coins, Roman law, Roman military stations, and cities organized with familiar features: forums, baths, temples, amphitheaters, theaters, walls, gates, and markets. Cities were the heart of Roman civilization. Rome encouraged urban life because cities made administration easier. Local elites built public structures, sponsored games, paid for temples, and competed for honor. A wealthy man in a provincial city might fund a bathhouse or a theater, not only from generosity, but to gain status and memory. Public life was visible. Stone inscriptions recorded names, offices, gifts, dedications, and honors. To be remembered mattered. The Roman world was full of writing carved into stone. Yet most people lived lives that left little record. Farmers, laborers, women managing households, children learning trades, soldiers writing letters home, enslaved workers whose names were rarely preserved, sailors, cooks, weavers, bakers, mothers, healers, porters, shepherds. They were the living body of the empire, even if history often remembers the emperors first. After Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius became emperor in AD 161. Marcus Aurelius is remembered as the philosopher emperor. He was a Stoic, a man who reflected deeply on duty, self-control, mortality, and the nature of life. His private writings, known as the Meditations, were not written for publication. They were notes to himself, reminders to remain steady in a world of responsibility and change. He wrote about accepting what happens, about doing one's duty, about the shortness of life, about not being ruled by anger, vanity, or fear. To many modern readers, Marcus Aurelius feels close and human, even across nearly 2,000 years. But his reign was not peaceful. The empire faced war and disease. In the east, Rome fought Parthia. Soldiers returning from the campaign may have helped spread a devastating epidemic known as the Antonine Plague. This disease moved through the empire and killed many people. Its exact identity is debated, but its effects were serious. Population, army strength, economy, and morale were all damaged. At the same time, pressure increased along the northern frontiers. Germanic and other groups pushed toward Roman territory. Marcus spent much of his later reign campaigning along the Danube. Imagine the philosopher-emperor not in a quiet marble study, but in a military camp near a cold frontier. Rain on tents. Mud underfoot. Reports arriving from commanders. Letters from distant provinces. Illness moving through ranks. The weight of empire pressing heavily on one man. In such conditions, he wrote reminders to himself. Be patient. Do your duty. Do not be surprised by human behavior. You will die. Therefore live rightly now. Marcus Aurelius represents one of the most moving contradictions of Rome, a ruler who thought deeply about virtue, while commanding one of the most powerful military states in history. When Marcus died in AD 180, many later historians saw his death as the end of Rome's golden age. This is too simple, but it captures a feeling. After him came his son Commodus. Unlike the previous pattern of adoptive succession, where emperors chose capable heirs, Marcus passed power to his biological son. Commodus had been raised in imperial privilege. He was young, self-indulgent, and increasingly unstable. He loved gladiatorial display and presented himself as a kind of Hercules. He fought in the arena, though with every advantage. He renamed things after himself. He neglected administration. Political life became dangerous. Conspiracies formed. In AD 192, Commodus was assassinated. His death marked another turning point. The calm age of the 2nd century gave way to renewed instability. Once again, the question returned. Who would rule Rome? Once again, armies would help answer. The empire that had seemed so stable under Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius was still powerful, still wealthy, still enormous. But beneath its grandeur were pressures that would grow in the next centuries. The frontiers were long. The army was expensive. Succession remained uncertain. The emperor's position depended on military loyalty. The economy was complex and vulnerable. Disease had weakened populations. Powerful generals could become kingmakers. The Senate was no longer the central force it had once been. Rome had reached one of the highest points in its history. Its roads stretched across continents. Its cities shone with stone, water, and light. Its law shaped millions of lives. Its armies guarded rivers, deserts, mountains, and seas. Its culture blended Roman, Greek, Egyptian, Syrian, Gallic, African, Iberian, and countless local traditions. But no empire, however vast, stands outside time. The same roads that connected the empire could carry news of rebellion. The same armies that defended the frontiers could make and unmake emperors. The same wealth that built cities could attract invasion and competition. The same central power that brought order could become fragile when the center failed. For now, picture the Roman Empire at its height. A traveler stands on a road in southern Gaul. The road is straight, paved, and solid beneath the sun. Milestones mark distances. A courier rides past carrying imperial messages. A farmer drives a cart of grapes toward town. A group of soldiers marches in the distance. Ahead, a city rises with walls, a theater, a forum, baths, and temples. In the market, people speak Latin, local languages, and perhaps Greek. Coins bear the emperor's image. Water flows from an aqueduct. Children run through colonnaded streets. At sunset, smoke rises from cooking fires. Somewhere, an inscription is being carved into stone. Somewhere else, a letter is being written home. Far away, in Rome, the emperor's name is spoken in ceremony. Farther still, on the frontier, a soldier watches the river and wonders when he will return. This was Rome. Not only one city. Not only one man. Not only conquest. But a vast, living world. Ordered and unequal. Brilliant and brutal. stable and vulnerable, ancient and always changing. By the end of the 2nd century, Rome had shown what imperial power could build. Now the question was whether such a world could endure the storms that were coming. The next chapter would be more troubled. Emperors would rise and fall quickly. Armies would fight for power. Frontiers would shake. The economy would strain. The old gods would share the empire with new faiths. And Rome would begin to transform into something different from what Augustus had created. Not ending yet. Not even close. But changing. Slowly at first. Then faster. Like a great building whose stones still stand, while deep inside, the foundations begin to shift. Like a great building whose stones still stand, while deep inside, the foundations begin to shift. After the death of Commodus, Rome entered another period of uncertainty. The empire was still vast. Its roads still carried travelers and messages. Its cities still held markets, baths, temples, and theaters. Its armies still guarded the frontiers. The Mediterranean was still, in many ways, a Roman sea. But the calm surface had begun to break. In AD 193, after Commodus was killed, several men claimed the imperial throne. This year is sometimes called the Year of the Five Emperors. Power moved quickly, dangerously, and often violently. The Praetorian Guard even auctioned the throne for a time, a sign of how strange and unstable Roman politics had become. Out of this confusion rose Septimius Severus. He was a powerful general from North Africa, born in Leptis Magna, in what is now Libya. His rise showed again how wide the Roman world had become. The emperor no longer had to come from Rome, or even Italy. The empire had created elites across its provinces, and those elites could reach the very top. Severus defeated his rivals and founded the Severan dynasty. He strengthened the army, increased soldiers' pay, and relied heavily on military power. On his deathbed, according to tradition, he told his sons, "Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and scorn all others." Whether he said those exact words or not, they capture a truth about the age. The army was becoming even more central. An emperor who could not keep the soldiers loyal was not safe. Severus was followed by his sons, Caracalla and Geta. Their relationship was bitter. Caracalla had Geta murdered, even in the presence of their mother, Julia Domna. Caracalla then ruled alone. In AD 212, Caracalla issued one of the most important legal changes in Roman history, the Constitutio Antoniniana, which granted Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. For centuries, Roman citizenship had been a prized status, gradually extended to individuals, communities, and allies. Now, almost all free people across the empire became citizens. This changed what it meant to be Roman. Rome was no longer only a city, nor even simply Italy ruling provinces. Legally, the empire's free population was drawn into a wider Roman identity. People in Syria, Gaul, Egypt, Africa, Spain, and the Balkans could all be Roman citizens. The meaning of Rome had expanded far beyond the Tiber. But legal unity did not solve the empire's growing problems. The 3rd century brought crisis. After the Severan dynasty ended in AD 235, Rome entered a period often called the crisis of the 3rd century. For about 50 years, emperors came and went with frightening speed. Many were soldiers raised by their armies. Many were murdered by the same soldiers who had elevated them. Civil wars became frequent. Usurpers appeared in different regions. Frontiers came under intense pressure. The empire was too large. Its borders were too long. Its enemies were stronger than before. In the east, the Parthian Empire was replaced by the Sasanian Persian Empire, a more centralized and aggressive power. The Sasanians challenged Rome for control of Armenia, Mesopotamia, and the eastern frontier. In AD 260, a shocking event occurred. The Roman Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persian king Shapur I. An emperor taken prisoner by a foreign enemy. This was a deep humiliation for Rome. In the north, Germanic groups crossed the Rhine and Danube frontiers. Goths, Franks, Alemanni, and others raided or settled near Roman territory. These groups were not simple barbarians in the old Roman imagination. They were diverse peoples, changing over time, sometimes enemies, sometimes trading partners, sometimes recruits in Roman armies. But during the 3rd century, frontier pressure increased dramatically. At the same time, the empire suffered economic strain. Civil wars disrupted trade. Armies required enormous funding. Coinage was debased, meaning the silver content of coins was reduced. Inflation rose. Taxes became heavier. Local communities struggled. Cities that had once flourished under the stability of the Pax Romana faced new burdens. Disease may also have returned in waves, weakening populations and armies. The empire even split temporarily. In the west, a breakaway Gallic empire formed, including Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain. In the east, the city of Palmyra, under the remarkable Queen Zenobia, gained control over large territories, including Egypt for a time. Rome seemed to be coming apart. And yet, it did not fall. This is one of the most important things to understand about Roman history. The empire was not fragile in a simple way. It could bend under immense pressure and still survive. It had deep resources, cities, roads, armies, administrative habits, tax systems, local elites, imperial ideology, and a population accustomed to Roman rule. Even in crisis, many people still found meaning and advantage in the empire's continuation. Strong soldier emperors helped restore order. One of them was Aurelian, who ruled from AD 270 to 275. Aurelian was energetic, capable, and ruthless. He defeated external enemies, reconquered the breakaway Palmyrene and Gallic territories, and reunified the empire. He also built new walls around the city of Rome, known as the Aurelian Walls. The fact that Rome itself needed stronger walls showed how much the world had changed. In the age of Augustus, Rome had seemed secure at the center of an expanding empire. In the 3rd century, even the old capital prepared for danger. Aurelian was called Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. But like many emperors of his time, he was assassinated. Stability required more than one strong man. It required a new structure. That structure came under Diocletian. Diocletian became emperor in AD 284. He understood that the old system could no longer manage the empire's problems. One emperor, traveling from crisis to crisis, could not easily defend all frontiers, manage all armies, and govern all regions. So Diocletian reorganized imperial power. He created the Tetrarchy, or rule of 4. There would be 2 senior emperors, called Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, called Caesars. Each would govern different regions and help defend the empire. The idea was to make succession more orderly and government more effective. The empire was not divided permanently yet, but imperial rule became more regional. Diocletian also reformed the army, taxation, administration, and provinces. He increased bureaucracy. He separated military and civilian authority more clearly. He made the emperor more distant, ceremonial, and awe-inspiring. Earlier emperors had often presented themselves as first citizens, now the emperor was surrounded by elaborate court ritual. The empire had become more authoritarian, more structured, more bureaucratic, more openly monarchical. These changes helped stabilize Rome, but they also made the state heavier. Taxes and regulations increased. People became more tied to professions and local obligations. The Roman world of the 4th century was not the same as the world of Augustus or Trajan. It was still Rome, but transformed. Diocletian is also remembered for the last great persecution of Christians. Christianity had begun in the eastern provinces in the 1st century. For a long time, it was a small and sometimes persecuted movement within the empire. Christians refused to sacrifice to Roman gods and to the emperor's divine honors, which made them seem suspicious to Roman authorities. Persecutions varied by time and place, but under Diocletian, beginning in AD 303, the state launched a severe effort to suppress Christianity. Churches were destroyed. Scriptures were seized. Christians were imprisoned, tortured, or executed. But persecution did not destroy the faith. In fact, Christianity continued to grow. By the early 4th century, the empire was changing not only politically, but spiritually. After Diocletian retired in AD 305, the Tetrarchy eventually collapsed into conflict. Ambitious rulers fought for supremacy. Out of this struggle emerged Constantine. Constantine was one of the most important figures in Roman history. In AD 312, he faced his rival Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, near Rome. According to Christian tradition, Constantine saw a vision before the battle, a sign connected with the Christian God, and was told, "In this sign, conquer." The exact nature of the event is debated, but Constantine's victory changed history. After defeating Maxentius, Constantine became the dominant ruler in the West. In AD 313, Constantine and Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, granting toleration to Christianity. This did not make Christianity the official religion immediately, but it ended persecution and allowed Christians to worship openly. Constantine supported the church, gave privileges to Christian clergy, funded churches, and involved himself in Christian disputes. In AD 325, he called the Council of Nicaea, where bishops gathered to address theological controversies, especially the dispute over Arianism and the nature of Christ. The Roman Emperor was now deeply involved in Christian affairs. This was a profound transformation. A state that had once persecuted Christians now had an emperor who favored Christianity. The change was not instant everywhere. Pagan traditions continued. Many people still worshiped the old gods. Roman religion was deeply rooted in cities, families, festivals, and local identity. But the direction of imperial power had shifted. Constantine also founded a new imperial capital. On the site of the old Greek city of Byzantium, he built Constantinople, dedicated in AD 330. The city stood in an extraordinary location, between Europe and Asia, controlling passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It was easier to defend than Rome, closer to the wealthy eastern provinces, and strategically placed for the empire's new realities. Constantinople would become one of the greatest cities in history. For more than 1,000 years, it would remain a center of Roman power, Greek culture, Christian faith, trade, diplomacy, and imperial ceremony. At the time, however, Constantine did not think he was founding a Byzantine empire. He was building a new Rome. The Roman Empire continued, but its center of gravity was moving east. The 4th century empire was increasingly divided between Western and Eastern administrations. This division made practical sense. The empire was vast, and different regions faced different pressures. But over time, the Western and Eastern halves developed different strengths. The Eastern Empire was wealthier, more urbanized, and more stable in many ways. It had richer tax bases, older cities, and stronger strategic depth. The Western Empire faced heavier pressure along the Rhine and Danube, struggled with weaker finances, and became more dependent on military commanders and federate groups. After Constantine, his sons and successors struggled for power. The empire saw more civil wars, religious conflicts, and frontier problems. One emperor, Julian, tried to revive traditional pagan religion, but his reign was short. Christianity continued to gain strength. In AD 378, a major disaster struck the Eastern Empire. The Goths, who had been allowed to enter Roman territory while fleeing the Huns, were badly mistreated by Roman officials. Desperate and angered, they rebelled. The Eastern Emperor Valens marched against them and met them near Adrianople. The Battle of Adrianople was a catastrophe for Rome. Valens was killed. A large Roman army was destroyed. The defeat shocked the empire. It showed that groups crossing into Roman territory could not simply be absorbed or controlled easily. It also revealed serious weaknesses in Roman military organization and frontier policy. But again, Rome did not collapse immediately. Theodosius I eventually became emperor and made arrangements with the Goths, allowing them to settle inside the empire as foederati, allied groups who provided military service. This was practical, but it also changed the relationship between the empire and non-Roman peoples living within its borders. Theodosius was also important religiously. In AD 380, under Theodosius, Nicene Christianity became the official religion of the empire. Later, traditional pagan practices faced increasing restrictions. Temples were closed or converted. Christian bishops became powerful figures in civic life. The spiritual landscape of Rome had changed completely from the days of Augustus. In AD 395, Theodosius died. After his death, the empire was divided between his two sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. This division became permanent. There was still the idea of one Roman Empire, but in practice, East and West followed different paths. The Western Empire entered its final century. It did not fall in one day. It weakened gradually, through layers of pressure. Internal political instability. Economic strain. Dependence on military strongmen. Loss of tax revenue. Civil wars. Frontier pressure. Migration and settlement of non-Roman groups. The difficulty of controlling armies. The growing power of generals of barbarian origin serving within the Roman system. Rome itself, the old capital, had already lost much political importance. Western emperors often ruled from more defensible cities such as Milan or Ravenna. Ravenna, surrounded by marshes, became an important Western capital because it was easier to defend. Still, Rome remained symbolic. The city of Romulus. The city of the Senate. The city of old temples, monuments, memories, and imperial grandeur. In AD 410, Rome was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric. This event shook the Roman world. Rome had not been sacked by a foreign enemy for centuries. Although the Western Empire did not end in 410, the psychological impact was enormous. How could the Eternal City be entered and plundered? For many, it felt like the end of an age. The Christian writer Augustus responded to the shock in his great work The City of God, arguing that earthly cities rise and fall, but the City of God is eternal. His writing shows how deeply the sack of Rome affected people's sense of history and meaning. The Western Empire continued, but its power was shrinking. In Gaul, Spain, and North Africa, new kingdoms emerged. Some were ruled by peoples who had entered the empire as migrants, soldiers, or invaders. The Visigoths, Vandals, Burgundians, Franks, and others carved out territories. They were not simply outside Rome, many had long interacted with Roman society, served in Roman armies, adopted Roman customs, or governed Roman populations. The line between Roman and barbarian was often complex. One of the most damaging blows to the Western Empire was the loss of North Africa to the Vandals in the 430s. North Africa was wealthy and vital, especially for grain and tax revenue. When the Vandals took Carthage in AD 439, the Western Empire lost a major source of wealth. Without that revenue, maintaining armies became even harder. In AD 455, Rome was sacked again, this time by the Vandals. The old city endured humiliation once more. By this time, Western emperors were often weak figures controlled by powerful generals. The title of emperor remained, but real power shifted. Some emperors were children. Some lasted briefly. Some were appointed and removed by military leaders. In AD 476, a Germanic military leader named Odoacer deposed the young Western emperor Romulus Augustulus. The boy's name was strangely symbolic. Romulus, like the legendary founder of Rome. Augustulus, meaning Little Augustus. A small echo of Rome's beginning and its imperial founder. Odoacer did not appoint another Western emperor. Instead, he sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern emperor in Constantinople and ruled Italy as king, nominally under Eastern authority. Traditionally, AD 476 is given as the date of the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But history is rarely as neat as dates. For many people living at the time, life did not suddenly change overnight. Taxes continued in some places. Roman law continued. Roman landowners remained. Latin continued to be spoken. Cities still stood. Churches still functioned. The Senate in Rome continued for a time. Many institutions and habits of Roman life survived under new rulers. The Western Empire did not vanish like a candle blown out. It transformed. It fragmented. It became a world of successor kingdoms, Christian bishops, local aristocracies, Roman traditions, Germanic rulers, and slowly changing identities. The eastern half of the Roman Empire did not fall in 476. It continued from Constantinople. Today, we often call it the Byzantine Empire, but its people called themselves Romans. They saw their empire as the continuation of Rome. Their emperor was the Roman emperor. Their state preserved Roman law, Roman administration, and imperial ceremony, though its language and culture became increasingly Greek and Christian. In the 6th century, Emperor Justinian tried to restore Roman control over the lost western provinces. His generals, especially Belisarius and Narses, reconquered North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. Justinian also ordered the codification of Roman law, producing the Corpus Juris Civilis, which would influence legal traditions for centuries. He built the great Church of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, one of the most extraordinary buildings in world history. For a time, it seemed that the Roman world might be reunited. But Justinian's wars were costly. Italy was devastated. The empire faced plague, financial strain, and renewed enemies. In the centuries that followed, the Eastern Empire survived enormous challenges: Persian wars, Arab conquests, sieges of Constantinople, religious disputes, internal conflicts, and territorial losses. It changed deeply, but it endured. Constantinople finally fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. If we follow the Eastern Roman line, then the Roman Empire did not truly end in 476, but continued for nearly 1,000 years more. This is one of the most fascinating things about Rome. Its endings are many. The Roman Republic ended, but Rome continued as empire. The Western Empire fell, but Roman traditions continued in kingdoms, law, language, and the church. The Eastern Empire endured, transformed, and called itself Roman until the 15th century. Even after Constantinople fell, Rome lived on in memory, imitation, law, architecture, language, religion, politics, and imagination. Latin became the root of Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and others. Roman law shaped legal systems. Roman roads, bridges, walls, aqueducts, and ruins remained across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The idea of empire inspired later rulers. Charlemagne was crowned emperor in Rome in AD 800. The Holy Roman Empire carried Roman language and symbolism, though it was very different from ancient Rome. The Russian word Tsar and the German Kaiser both come from Caesar. Modern republics studied Roman politics. Modern architecture borrowed Roman forms, columns, domes, arches, forums, capitals. The Roman past became a mirror in which later ages saw power, order, corruption, greatness, warning, and ambition. But beyond the grand legacy, it is worth returning to the human scale. Rome was not only emperors, not only legions, not only marble, not only conquest. Rome was also ordinary people living in an extraordinary system. A child in Pompeii scratching letters into wax. A merchant counting coins in a port city. A woman lighting a household shrine. An enslaved person carrying water before dawn. A soldier riding home from Britain. A potter shaping clay in Gaul. A farmer watching clouds over an African field. A teacher reading Homer in a Greek city under Roman rule. A baker pulling bread from an oven. A traveler stepping onto a paved road and trusting it would lead to the next town. A mother listening for footsteps in a crowded apartment block in Rome. A sailor watching the lighthouse at Alexandria. A monk copying words in late antiquity. A citizen standing in a bathhouse, hearing news from the frontier. A bishop preaching in a city where old temples still cast shadows. All of them lived within the long, complicated world Rome made. Some benefited from it. Some suffered under it. Many did both in different ways. Empire is never one thing. It builds and destroys. Connects and controls. Protects and exploits. Creates order and demands obedience. Rome gave the Mediterranean world roads, laws, cities, security, and cultural exchange. It also gave it conquest, slavery, taxation, hierarchy, and violence. To tell Rome's history calmly is not to make it harmless. It is to see it clearly. A small settlement by the Tiber became a kingdom. The kingdom became a republic. The republic conquered Italy. Then Carthage. Then the Mediterranean. The republic became too powerful for its old institutions. Generals turned armies into political weapons. Civil wars broke the state. Augustus built an empire while speaking the language of restoration. The empire reached a long peace. It expanded, organized, connected, and absorbed. It reached its greatest extent under Trajan. It consolidated under Hadrian. It lived calmly under Antoninus Pius. It reflected deeply and suffered heavily under Marcus Aurelius. Then came instability. Soldier emperors. Civil wars. Plague. Economic strain. Frontier pressure. Reform. Christianization. Division. Transformation. The West fragmented. The East endured. And the name of Rome continued to echo long after the old Senate lost its power and the legions no longer marched beneath the same eagles. If you imagine Rome now, do not imagine only the Colosseum in sunlight. Imagine the whole long river of its history. The early huts on the Palatine Hill. The kings whose memories became legend. The republic's crowded forum. The farmer soldiers marching out to local wars. The ships burning in the Punic Wars. Hannibal crossing the Alps. Carthage falling. The Gracchi speaking for reform. Sulla marching on Rome. Caesar crossing the Rubicon. The Senate on the Ides of March. Augustus standing carefully between republic and monarchy. The marble city rising. The roads stretching outward. The aqueducts carrying water. The legions on the Rhine. The merchants in Alexandria. The temples of old gods. The hidden gatherings of early Christians. The philosophers writing by lamplight. The emperors loved, feared, mocked, and murdered. The walls built around Rome when danger returned. Constantine looking eastward. Constantinople rising beside the Bosporus. The Visigoths entering Rome. The last Western emperor removed. The Eastern emperors still calling themselves Roman. The Great Dome of Hagia Sophia. The final walls of Constantinople in 1453. All of it belongs to the story. A story of power, endurance, adaptation, and change. Rome lasted so long because it was never only one thing. It could be city, republic, empire, law, army, memory, and idea. It could absorb enemies and turn them into citizens. It could borrow from others and call the result Roman. It could survive disasters that should have ended it. But it could not escape time. No empire can. The lesson of Rome is not simply that great powers fall. It is that great powers change before they fall. They transform. They adapt. They harden. They divide. They remember themselves differently. They become symbols even while still alive. And long after their political structures disappear, they continue inside the worlds that follow them. Rome is gone. And Rome remains. It remains in words. In law. In roads. In ruins. In cities. In churches. In calendars. In political ideas. In stories. In warnings. In dreams of order. In fears of tyranny. In the shape of arches and domes. In the languages spoken by millions. In the imagination of anyone who has ever stood before an ancient stone and wondered how long a human world can last. Perhaps that is why Rome still holds us. Not because it was perfect. It was not. Not because it was only glorious. It was often cruel. But because it was human on a vast scale. Ambitious. Brilliant. Violent. Practical. Superstitious. Disciplined. Corrupt. Creative. Afraid. Persistent. Always building. Always remembering. Always changing. And in the end, always subject to time. So let the history of Rome settle now like evening light on old stone. Let the noise of battles fade. Let the speeches in the Senate grow quiet. Let the crowds leave the forum. Let the fires in the temples burn low. Let the footsteps on the roads grow distant. Let the legions disappear into the mist of the frontier. Let the emperors become names carved into marble. Let the marble weather. Let grass grow between stones. Let rain fall on broken columns. Let the Tiber continue moving through the city, as it did before Rome rose, and as it did after emperors were gone. The river remains. Quiet. Patient. Carrying the memory of hills, bridges, ruins, and mornings. Long before empire, there was a river. Long after empire, there was still a river. And beside it, the city endured in another form. Not the Rome of Romulus. Not the Rome of Caesar. Not the Rome of Augustus. Not the Rome of Constantine. But Rome still. Changed. Layered. Remembering. If you were to walk there at dawn, you might see the light touch old stones, church domes, narrow streets, fragments of walls, and columns that no longer hold what they once held. You might hear traffic, bells, footsteps, and voices. You might pass ruins that were once the center of the world. And perhaps, for a moment, you would feel time folded together. The small settlement. The republic. The empire. The Christian city. The medieval city. The modern city. All resting on the same earth. All beside the same river. That is the quiet ending of Rome's ancient story. Not silence. Not disappearance. But layers. The empire fell in the west. The east endured for centuries. The ideal lived on. The ruins remained. The river continued. And history, like the Tiber, kept moving. Slowly. Patiently. Carrying what was broken. Carrying what survived. Carrying the memory of a city that began with hills and legend, and became one of the most powerful worlds humanity has ever known. This was the story of Rome. A story of beginnings and endings. Of roads and armies. Of law and ambition. Of marble and dust. Of emperors and ordinary people. Of conquest and transformation. Of a city that became an empire. And an empire that became a memory too large to disappear. Now the old roads are quiet. The Senate benches are empty. The standards no longer rise above marching legions. The voices of emperors are gone. But the story remains. Softly. In stone. In language. In law. In the shape of cities. In the imagination. And in the long, slow river of history, moving always forward, carrying Rome with it into the dark and into the morning.